there is a moment, quiet and almost invisible, when you realize something other than you has been living your life. Not a person, not an addiction exactly, but a rhythm, a pattern that moves through your days, whispering decisions before you make them. You think you're choosing, but really, you're remembering. You're reliving something older than choice. Carl Jung would call this the pull of the unconscious, the ancient currents beneath thought that repeat themselves until we finally see them. A habit that controls you isn't just behavior. It's a story the psyche keeps retelling because the ending was never understood. We don't repeat what satisfies us. We repeat what's unresolved. That's why you find yourself circling the same disappointments, the same emotional landscapes, no matter how much you change the scenery. The unconscious doesn't care about comfort. It cares about completion. Every time you do the thing you swore you wouldn't, every time you reach for distraction, sabotage peace, or chase what hurts, that's not weakness. That's communication. Something beneath awareness is trying to speak in the only language it knows: repetition. If this feels familiar, stay with me. Jung believed that the habits which feel compulsive are messengers from the shadow, the disowned part of the self that we buried to survive. The shadow is not evil. It is everything we refused to see, because seeing it once costs too much. It holds our anger, our envy, our hunger, our forgotten courage. And when we suppress it, it doesn't disappear. It slips beneath consciousness and begins to steer from below. A life-controlling habit is the shadow's handwriting on your everyday behavior. The late-night scrolling, the quiet lies, the self-criticism, the endless performing. These are symbols, not sins. They are the psyche's metaphors for unmet needs. Jung wrote that what we resist not only persists, it grows in size, because resistance feeds what it fears. So the harder you fight the habit, the deeper its roots twist into your identity. You wake up feeling powerless, ashamed, telling yourself, "This is just who I am." But you are not the pattern. You are the one who can witness it. And that awareness is the beginning of freedom. To see your habit not as a flaw, but as a reflection. That is the first act of inner courage. Because it means admitting that what you call bad may actually be meaningful. That there's intelligence even in the destruction. The psyche never wastes energy. Every pattern serves something, even if that something is hidden. People often say, "I can't stop." But the question Jung would ask is, who is the I that's speaking? The ego, the part of us that manages life, believes it's in control. Yet beneath it lies a vast territory of forgotten selves. The child who never felt safe. The lover who never felt chosen. The creator who never felt worthy. These inner figures hold their own needs, and when ignored, they seize behavior to make themselves known. When you reach for the habit, it's often them reaching through you. It's the psyche's rebellion against silence. So to break the habit, you don't conquer it. You listen to it. You translate its symbolic language into human understanding. That's what Jung meant by individuation and the slow, sacred process of becoming whole. To individuate is to integrate what was exiled, to look at the shadow and say, "You belong." Because what you accept can transform, but what you condemn stays the same. Think of your habit as a symptom of separation. the distance between who you are and what you've refused to feel. Every repetition is an invitation to close that distance. Every compulsion says, "Come find me where you left me." And that's why change is not about willpower. It's about relationship. You can't heal what you hate. You can only heal what you're willing to understand. When you finally sit with the habit instead of fighting it, when you ask, "What are you trying to protect me from?" something softens. You begin to sense that this behavior once served you. It numbed what you couldn't process. It gave shape to chaos. It made unbearable emotions survivable. The psyche repeats because repetition once meant safety. And safety is not something you give up easily, even when it hurts. So when you find yourself on the edge of that familiar impulse, pause. Feel what rises before the action. There's always a flicker, a feeling, a fear, a memory. That's the threshold between the conscious and the unconscious. Most people run from it, but that's where the transformation begins. Because the moment you can stay with that feeling, the ache before the act, you are no longer inside the habit. You're watching it. You're witnessing the part of you that used to control without question. And the watcher is always freer than the actor. Breaking a habit isn't about breaking yourself. It's about reclaiming what's been trying to come home through the only doorway it knew. The habit is a messenger. The message is asking to be read. And somewhere inside, a voice begins to whisper, "Maybe this thing that's been controlling me is not my enemy. Maybe it's the part of me that loves me enough to never stop trying to get my attention." The question is, will you listen long enough to understand what it's saying? Because when you finally begin to listen, what you hear is not what you expect. It doesn't speak in words. It speaks in symbols, dreams, sudden emotions. It speaks in the language of what you avoid. And as you start to understand that language, you realize the habit isn't repeating because it's powerful. It's repeating because it's lonely. And that is where the real work begins. Jung said that what we call neurosis is the suffering of a soul that has not yet found its meaning. Every compulsive act, every cycle of self-betrayal is a symptom of meaning trying to be born. When the psyche cannot express truth consciously, it expresses it through conflict. The habit becomes the theater where the inner drama plays out, the only stage on which the exiled parts of you can perform. You think you're fighting behavior, but you're really fighting yourself. The part that wants to stop is at war with the part that refuses to be silenced. And both are you. Imagine the psyche as a vast house. The rooms you live in are your conscious life, the roles, the routines, the story you tell others. But beneath the floorboards are locked doors, unvisited rooms. Each holds a piece of you that was once too painful or too alive to keep. The habit lives at the doorway between those worlds, the conscious and the forgotten. Every time you repeat it, you open that door a little, but you also slam it shut in shame. That's why it never ends. It's both the attempt and the avoidance at once. Jung believed the shadow carries vital energy, the very life force we've disowned. That's why confronting it feels electrifying and terrifying. You sense the aliveness that was trapped there, the emotions that were once forbidden. To break the habit, then, is not to kill the shadow, but to make peace with its power. To say, you don't have to run my life anymore, but I'm willing to feel what you feel. This is why transformation feels like loss, because to grow, the psyche must dismantle its own defense. What protected you now constrains you, but it doesn't know that yet. It still believes danger is near. So the moment you move toward healing, fear rises. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because the old system thinks it's dying. And in a way, it is. That's the paradox of freedom. It begins with grief. You grieve the person who needed the habit. You grieve the comfort it gave. You grieve the control you thought you had. But underneath that grief, something truer starts breathing. A quieter will that doesn't demand, doesn't repeat, just observes. Jung called this the self, the totality that holds both light and shadow, conscious and unconscious. The self doesn't destroy what's dark. It redeems it by inclusion. When you begin to sense that larger self moving through you, you realize that the habit was never a curse. It was a compass. It pointed you toward the unfinished story. It led you to the place where awareness was needed most. But awareness alone is not enough. To bring the unconscious to light, you must stay long enough to feel what the light reveals. Most people escape here. They understand the pattern intellectually. They know why they do it. But they can't bear the emotional truth underneath. The old loneliness, the shame, the unmet need for love. But insight without feeling is sterile. The psyche doesn't transform through knowledge. It transforms through contact. So when you notice the habit arise, don't analyze. Feel. Let the body speak. Let the tremor of memory move through you. Because that tremor is the language of integration. The shadow stepping into light. The inner child stepping into safety. You'll notice then that the need to repeat begins to soften. Not because you forced it, but because it has been seen. The unconscious only drives what the conscious refuses to hold. What was once compulsion becomes communication. And communication can evolve into choice. Choice, true choice, isn't the ego's command. It's the natural result of wholeness. When every part of you has a voice, the battle ends. Yet even this freedom is fragile. The old rhythms will call you back. The psyche doesn't release its patterns easily. They're etched into your nervous system, your gestures, your speech. Sometimes you'll relapse, not into failure, but into remembering. Relapse is the psyche's way of saying, there's still more to understand. You are never back at the beginning. You are back at a deeper layer of the same truth. So treat each return as a teacher. Ask, what is this showing me now? Perhaps a subtler fear. Perhaps a forgotten tenderness. Perhaps the next step in becoming whole. When you start to see the habit this way, shame loses its grip. You no longer define yourself by the repetition. You define yourself by the awareness that meets it. And in that awareness, something sacred happens. The unconscious begins to trust you. It no longer needs to hijack your behavior to be heard. It knows you will listen willingly. That is the quiet revolution Jung spoke of, the movement from possession to participation, from being driven by the unconscious to dancing with it. You can feel it, the shift from compulsion to conversation. The energy that once drove destruction now fuels creation. The shadow becomes muse. The habit becomes doorway. And yet, as with all transformations, the moment you glimpse freedom, another question emerges. one even deeper than breaking the pattern. If the habit was protecting you from pain, what will protect you now? Because when the armor falls away, you don't just feel lighter, you feel naked. The emotions that once hid beneath the repetition now stand before you, asking to be held. And that is where the real courage begins. Freedom is not the end of the habit. It's the beginning of intimacy with yourself. Without the repetition to distract you, you start to meet the rawness that the habit once softened. The loneliness, the quiet terror of stillness, the strange question of who you are when you're no longer performing survival. This is the part Jung called the encounter with the self, not the polished image, but the living totality. The self doesn't flatter or comfort. It reveals. You may notice that what you use to chase in the outer world, validation, chaos, control, now appears inside you as sensations. You feel it in the chest, the stomach, the throat. The unconscious has come home. At first, it's overwhelming. You might long for the old numbness, but stay. Because beneath that overwhelm is vitality, the life that was buried beneath control. Breaking the habit was never about fixing behavior. It was about reclaiming aliveness. You didn't lose willpower. You lost contact with your inner world. And now that contact is returning, fragile but real. The psyche doesn't want perfection. It wants participation. It wants you in dialogue with every part of yourself, the frightened one, the defiant one, the tired one, the one who still doubts. Wholeness is not harmony. It's inclusion. So when the old impulse flickers again, don't panic. It's just the unconscious checking if you're still listening. You can answer softly, "I'm here." That simple inner response, not suppression, not indulgence, but acknowledgement, is how you build trust with yourself. Trust is what breaks control. Because control is what you built when trust was lost. Jung wrote that the task of life is not to perfect the personality, but to make it translucent to the greater self. That means living in relationship with what's beyond comprehension, the mystery that moves through you as instinct, dream, creativity, and even conflict. The habit was one form of that mystery. A distorted form, yes, but a form nonetheless. And as you integrate its message, it dissolves back into the energy it always was, the raw material of transformation. You start to notice subtle shifts. The same situations arise, but your response carries space. The old urgency loosens. You feel choice where before there was compulsion. That's how the unconscious knows it's been met. It stops shouting. But beware the illusion of finality. The psyche is not a project. It's a living system. Every insight opens another layer. Every resolution reveals a deeper paradox. To live consciously is to keep listening. And maybe that's what breaking the habit truly means. Not ending a pattern, but beginning a dialogue that never ends. A lifelong conversation between what you know and what you're still discovering. In that sense, the habit was your initiation. It forced you to meet your own depths. It demanded honesty. It introduced you to the reality that control is never the answer. Relationship is. Now, each time you feel the echo of the old pattern, you can meet it with gratitude. It led you here. It broke you open. It taught you the sacred discipline of awareness. You may still stumble. You may still ache. But the difference is, you are awake within it. You can feel both the darkness and the light, and know they are not enemies. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that's what you've done. You've turned toward what once controlled you. And in doing so, you've reclaimed the part of you that was calling for love through repetition. Now, when you look back, you see that the habit was never just about behavior. It was about belonging to yourself. To the mind, this journey looks like breaking free. To the soul, it looks like coming home. You begin to live differently, not as someone fighting inner enemies, but as someone cultivating inner dialogue. You learn that the unconscious is not a force to be conquered, but a friend to be understood. And sometimes, late at night, when the old urge stirs, you don't fear it. You listen. You might even thank it for reminding you that healing isn't a straight line. It's a spiral, bringing you closer each time to what's real. The habit may fade. It may transform into art, into empathy, into wisdom. Because energy never disappears. It evolves through awareness. And you realize the very pattern that once trapped you was your teacher in disguise. It showed you where you were asleep. It showed you the edges of your own compassion. It taught you how to love what you once condemned. That is the essence of Jung's psychology. Not to become pure, but to become whole. Not to escape the unconscious, but to let it speak until it no longer needs to shout. And maybe, in the quiet that follows, you sense something vast and gentle moving through you. Not control, not fear, just life itself, unfolding as you. You breathe differently. You listen differently. You begin to trust the rhythm that once terrified you. And somewhere deep inside, a new habit forms. The habit of awareness, the habit of returning to yourself, the habit of remembering that even what once controlled you was always guiding you toward this moment of understanding. And maybe that's what freedom really is. Not the absence of patterns, but the ability to see every pattern as part of your becoming. You look inward and whisper, almost in awe, "I see you now." And the unconscious, after years of trying to reach you, finally answers, not in words, but in silence. The silence of something understood.